You're listening to WKDW Radio and KDWRadio.com, broadcasting from the Bishop West Real Estate Mobile Tower right here in sunny Northport, Florida. This is John Rawlings, and I have my very, very special guest in the house, Commissioner Whit. How are you doing?
Okay, John, and I noticed you gave me two verys.
Oh, yes. Well,
Very, very.
very, very. Well, how's it feel to get a double very?
That feels really good. Thank you.
Well, we were talking about trees just before we got on the air,
Of course, yeah.
and
Trees or
and
pies.
what's that?
Trees or pies? Take your pick. Yeah.
Trees are, and we did talk about 5-cent pies
And
because
we
you have a
did,
sign
yeah.
hanging behind you that says
I
that.
know.
So
Yeah.
it we've had lengthy discussions over the last 3 years, I think, of a tree ordinance.
Yes.
And it was one of your plans. And we were just talking about trees, and not here, but up in Ohio, and the value of trees, and really what they mean in different factors, like historical value. You made very valid points there. And of course, the pine trees that are in front of grandma's old house, they're wind blocks. So there's value in that too. So can you talk a little bit about the heritage of the trees in Northport? And then I want to kind of go into our new tree ordinance. And
Yes.
hopefully you can help explain some of that.
Right. Well, Northport is what's called a pine flatwoods area. So we have mainly slash pines, and the pines around here are not older. The most of them are about maybe 60, 70 years old. Because if you look at the old aerials of when general development came through, it wasn't very forested in some areas. Some areas it was. But for people who don't know, they're called slash pines because they would make the slashes to bleed them for the sap that made the turpentine. Unfortunately, that business, or maybe fortunately, they didn't think about sustainability because they didn't think about planting trees back from the trees that they were killing by draining all the sap out of them. So there are areas around here, such as Woodmere. There's a Woodmere Park in Venice. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that was a little town of Woodmere, and that was a turpentine camp. And so was McCall over in Englewood. It was the McCall Turpentine Camp. So they had heavily forested areas, but they didn't replant to keep their business going. So we have slash pines. We have some what's called longleaf pines, but they're not very prevalent in this particular area. And then of course we have our live oaks. We have laurel oaks, which are more prevalent when it's a wetter area. They don't have as long of a lifespan. I have a laurel oak in my backyard that's unfortunately on its way out, but I'm just going to let it go out on its own. 80 years is about all that they last. And when I bought the house here, now it's been 32 years, it was a big tree then. So I knew it was on its decline, so to speak, even though it was a beautiful tree up until about probably 5 years ago. So it's just hanging in there, but it's going to stay. That's how it is. So that is our main tree canopy that we have here. And what people have to realize is that what you talked about, the real benefits of having trees. They're wind blockers, sound blockers, and especially as we become more urbanized, sound, noise, all of those things start to intrude on our lives. And if you have trees around you, it's going to absorb that sound more. That's one thing. But the one thing that I really enjoy about trees is shade and their cooling properties, because if you have trees, the outside temperatures can be up to 15 degrees cooler because of the transpiration process, where the water comes up through the roots, up the trunk, and out the leaves. It's like a nature's air conditioner. And if you've ever noticed, when you go under trees on a hot day, it's kind of breezy under trees because you have convection winds. This is and I'm sorry, I'm getting into like a science lesson I used to do with my students
It's all good.
about what convection winds are. And I would say, did you ever wonder why it's always windy at the beach? And then they're like, no, we didn't know. It's because the sand is very hot. So you have hot air rising. The air over the water is cooler. So you get these convection winds. It's also why it'll be very windy when you go see the sunset until that sun disappears. Then all of a sudden it's there's no wind. And that's why. So having trees is going to give you breezes, and it's going to make things cooler. And of course, it provides natural shade, which is why I'm not a big fan of those plastic shade canopies that they put in playgrounds, because they may be blocking the sun, but they're doing nothing to reduce the actual heat temperature that you get under there.
Makes sense.
Yeah, yeah,
And
um, yeah.
good.
Then there's also the other side of that too. What I call like the hardcore part of trees is the infrastructure that trees give us. I refer to them as the engineering benefits, the stormwater control, erosion control. Those are
Mhm.
things that trees are doing for free. And then as soon as you take them away, you now have to replace that with man-made things, maintenance, and upkeep, and that's what costs money. And people don't realize that until the trees are gone, and then they say, "Wow, now we have erosion, we have floodwaters that was being taken care of for absolutely no cost. Now we have to have culverts and retention ponds and all this other kind of stuff that we have to bring in."
Well, it makes sense, and all these factors that are in. We're a town that's going to grow
Hmm.
exponentially as long as everything stays right on the economy side of things. And we've showed that twice now. We had an economic downturn in between the last boom.
Yep.
And I still think we're booming now. We're kind of off the charts booming still.
Right.
As far as, sales and growth and even commercial side. So we're seeing our city change overall and have a different feel to it coming.
Right.
And that's some say that's progress, some say slow progress down. Um, but it's hard to slow progress down when individuals own their own lots, and we're kind of like that here in Northport. It's not like we have these big swaths of land that nobody owns yet,
Right.
and we can say no, we're just not touching that.
Hmm.
Um, but we do have really good parks. We have, and they're really heavily treed, most of them. And I think just knowing what I know about our park system, there's some saving of heritage trees here going on. But you're kind of looking at you by not by yourself, but you and other commissioners in doing the tree ordinance. You're looking at things through a different lens, kind of right now, aren't you?
Yes, and I don't know. I guess that in a couple ways. I've always looked at the value of trees, like I mentioned my poor laurel oak, but I have pines. In that, what those trees were going to do for my life and what they did for me. My son was born here, and he was able to enjoy playing in the backyard from the get go. And it really it pains me when I see new houses built and there's absolutely nothing in that backyard, and I see that people are pretty much being held captive. And that's the only other word I could think of saying. Looking outside, because the outside is not anything enjoyable, and yet they came to an area that when they came here, they were first taken by the natural beauty of seeing the trees and the vegetation and the wildlife that it brings. And then they proceed to have something that's completely stripped of all that, and they stay inside their house and they look out the window, or they have a pool cage and they sit in a cage. And I have to tell you, John, I know that's a big thing here in Florida, but it wasn't until I was watching one of these backyard improvement shows, and there was a man, he came to Florida and he wanted to get rid of that cage, and he says, ask the people, do you have an objection to that? And they said, well, we really don't like the bugs. And he goes, okay, but I just don't get it with people in Florida. They'd like to live in a cage. But the way he said it, I never thought of it that way. Like, yes, that's what you're doing. Um, but instead of really enjoying and embracing Florida, people think of it as being hostile. But the thing is, with the tree ordinance, that it's encouraging conservation to keep something in that backyard, uh, of a like a tree, okay, so that you have something to say. I'm really living in Florida, and this is going to get to add so much value to my life, that we can go outside and enjoy being in Florida. And that's really where I've always come from, is just to have trees to make our life just better, just a better quality of life.
So can you explain the cost side of it to people who are, let's say we're clearing a lot and there's 45 trees on the lot. You're going to have a septic in the first third. You're going to have a house. Then you're going to have a pool in the back. There's always any time that there's decisions made, there's always a cost and effect, no matter how we want to put it out there. And I'm just trying to figure out, one on the realtor side and also the consumer side, that how do we explain? I love what you're doing. That's everything that you're talking about is 100% on. I will say that the only reason I had my pool was open, and I wish I had a screen, not because of trees, not because of debris. The state bird, the mosquito,
Yeah.
when you're in a pool, oh my God, that state bird just comes out of nowhere and just eats you alive. So there's another reason that you want to be caged in a pool, and it
I
doesn't
know. I
have to do
know.
with anything else.
I know.
But anyway, I thought
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just the funny side of things. But
Right. Right.
going back to the lot, we've got a lot of lots here that need to be cleared. I mean, we're maybe 70-75% built out, maybe 65, because we're doing a lot of things up in the West Villages, and we have a lot of land yet to. And I don't want to use the word cleared, because I think what you're trying to do is get people to realize you don't have to clear it. Let's just pick some trees and keep them. But is there enough on a cost and effect side of things? Is if there's 45 trees on that lot, and you got to clear the pretty much the front 2/3 and another huge portion of the other third, is there enough there that you can offset the cost of the
Oh,
mitigation?
yeah. First of all, the ordinance addresses native trees. It's only for the native pines and oaks, and even we brought in sable palms that are on that lot, and they have to have a diameter of at least 12 inches to be considered for mitigation. So the chances of having 45 trees on a quarter-acre lot that are 12 inches or larger is not, much. You're not going to have that many size trees that large on a quarter-acre lot. We were just talking before we went on air about how trees, if they crowd themselves, that you're going to have stunted growth there. So you're not going to have 45 trees. And then with pines, the mitigation is only a third of that diameter. So if it is a 12-inch pine tree and you cut it down, your mitigation amount is 3 inches. I'm sorry, it's 4 inches. So that's it. That's what you are going to be held responsible for. So that's number one. And that's the same thing with palms. If you take down a sable palm that has at least a 12-inch diameter, you're only responsible for a third for the mitigation. However, if you kept that same 12-inch pine on a lot somewhere in the corner, you would get double the diameter for credit. So that's something that is the part of the ordinance that encourages conservation. If it turns out to be a heritage tree, and we lowered the heritage classification from 30 inches to 24 inches. So if you keep a 24-inch diameter tree, it's an oak tree, for example, you're going to get 3 times that towards the mitigation points that you're assessed. So 24 times 3 is what, that's 72. So that's a lot of points there to encourage the keeping of trees, and also to reduce or not have to pay anything in mitigation costs. So the way it is now, the ordinance that has been in effect, the only mitigation, and you probably know this, was only for heritage trees that were considered at 30 inches in diameter. First of all, that's a really big tree.
It's
And
massive.
that only really applied to oaks, because it's very rare to find a pine. that is going to hit 30 inches in diameter. So this is why you had rampant clear cutting, because it was cost effective for developers and builders just to take down the trees. And we were talking before we went on air about how tree logging and tree companies, they remove a lot of those trees for the product, and that's in exchange for doing the work. If they can take the logs and turn it into product, and that's how they make their money. And that's pretty much what was going on and still is going on in Northport. When you see the log trucks that are coming in, they're not taking those trees to a landfill. They're delivering them to be turned into product, and they're making money. So essentially you were having harvesting going on with Northport getting nothing for that. So this is going to, encourage the keeping of trees, and if that's an option that you don't want to keep anything, well, then this is what it's going to cost, because it really is costing us in the long run to remove all those trees and not putting it back, because
So,
that it really, again, that canopy is what is bringing people to this area. That when they come here, they see that, what I call that wall of green that goes down when you go down the streets or still have undeveloped lots. That is what encourages people to move here. And once all that is gone, you're going to end up with the same thing that you left, unfortunately, whether it was from New Jersey. And I can say that, John, because that's where I was born and raised.
there you
So,
go.
but I left New Jersey for a reason. I didn't want to recreate it here. Um, and same thing with other people who are coming from the Great Lakes area and that Northeast corridor. They don't want to have that same mess, as some people call it, that they're leaving. Well, let's work so we don't just recreate the same thing that you moved away from.
Well, do we have we talk about the mitigation. So let's take the 45 tree example away. Can you come up with an example of what you think would be, because your experience has been like over the top good, and I know that you had a lot of influence in the conversation with the other commissioners, because I've asked questions and they're all saying, hey, talk to Alice. Because listen, when it comes to trees, I don't think we have anybody else around here that has your vast knowledge,
Mhm.
or has been this open about all of these things.
Right.
It's not like you've been sitting back hiding and saying, "Hey, I'm not going to talk about this until I want to." You were on my show a year ago, and then 2 years ago you were on again. But you weren't commissioner back then. So you've been talking about trees. You've been talking about all these things. I'm just wondering, and I'm still, even though you said all these things, I'm still trying to come up with dollar figures. Mitigation to me, I get it. I understand what has to happen there, but I haven't heard an example of how much dollars it's going to cost.
Right.
And if you could kind of talk about that, maybe explain that side of it, maybe that'll help even our community accept it better.
Sure. Um, well, like I said, most of when you were throwing out the figure of 45 trees, and I said, most quarter acre lots aren't sustaining 45 mature trees that are 12 inches in diameter or larger. So if you have, just, I don't know, just throw out even 10 would be a pretty good figure. If there were 10, say, pines and or oaks that were on a lot that were at least 12 inches in diameter, and I'll just use the 12 inches now just to give you a number, because I know you're chomping at the bit for some numbers here. But pines, again, the mitigation's only a third of that diameter, so that would be 4 inches that they would have to mitigate. So if there's 10 of those trees, and that's 40 inches they have to mitigate. And if they don't save anything and they don't plant any trees back on that property at all, they would have to pay $50 for every inch. So 40 times 50 is what?
2000.
Yeah, and that would be it. All right. So that is not going to make or break anybody's decision to build a house. And then again, all they would have to do is leave one 12-inch um, either palm or oak or pine, and that would be applied against those um, 40 inches that they're responsible for. So that would bring that cost down even lower. So it's not anything that's going to prevent development. It's not going to add any real substantial costs, because my understanding is the substantial cost for what's being developed is everything but the environment. It's the cost of the lot. Lot prices have gone up to, well, you probably know,
I did,
30, 40,
but
$50,000 for lots that people paid, $7,000 for not too long ago.
right.
But that's not deterring anybody from still buying that property and building their house. And the cost of
But,
construction goods, again, I heard, 2x4s used to be, I don't know, really inexpensive, and then the cost of lumber has gone up. But
yeah,
people said, hey, no problem, just add it in, and I'm going to pay it. And like you mentioned, we've gone through this before. The last building boom, there was a shortage on drywall, right? And that's when the big debacle came with the Chinese drywall coming in. We also had a shortage, I remember, for a while with PVC pipe. There was a shortage of that, um,
concrete.
and that boosted the price of houses back then. But it didn't deter anybody from building that house, because again, if you look at it over a 30-year mortgage, it breaks down to just dollars a month overall, and plus the fact that you're and I'm telling you everything you know, but I know you want me to say it too.
Oh, no,
that,
I'm listening
that house
intently.
is, yeah, the value of that house is going to increase every single year. So you're going to get back whatever it was, that initial investment, which I have to tell you was really what sold me on buying a house when I came here to Northport, when a realtor who knew her stuff, pointed out to me that even though that initial mortgage payment may seem really difficult in the beginning, it's going to pretty much stay the same. Your salary though will increase, and you're going to build up equity in that house, and you're going to actually end up, with
Oh, Alice froze up on me here. So hopefully she'll join us back here in a second, but she did freeze up. So if you can hear me, Alice, go ahead and try to reboot and come back on. We were talking with Alice White, Commissioner Alice White, about the new tree ordinance. This is John Rawlings with WKDW Radio 97.5 FM. And we're just talking about the new tree ordinance, the aspects of different trees that are out there. We did have one person, Sandy, who totally said, I totally agree. Too many trees cut down. That's true, but I don't think they're going to stop being cut down. They're just going to be mitigated a different way. So don't get shocked over that. But hopefully we'll get her to come back on here in a second. John Cook, nice to see you, John. John Cook says Northport's putting away is Northport putting away money for all the oaks that have been planted on Sumter, and that are 12 inches away from the sidewalks that will be destroying the sidewalks in years to come. Good point. That's just not Sumter, by the way. That's also Toledo Blade. I started counting trees when this topic came into play. So I got Alice coming back on here real quick. So I did drag this out a little bit when I knew you were rebooting.
sorry.
So that's okay. Sometimes you're free. Sometimes you got to go. And sometimes you got to come back.
I sit in
But
this room because this is where my router is, and it's just really frustrating when I get those things that, move closer to your router. How much closer can I get? It's literally right behind me. So I don't know what else I'm supposed to do.
right. Well, I was just talking. John Cook's information here is Northport putting away for all the oak trees that have been planted on Sumter, and that are 12 inches. I'm adding that in 12 inches away from the sidewalks that will be destroying the sidewalks in years to come.
Okay, they're not going to destroy the sidewalks, Mr. Cook, and that's another thing that you hear all the time. That's not something that happens. It happens less frequently than it does. And you know what? If that does happen, then you fix the sidewalk and move on. This is what communities do. If you've ever been up in Sarasota, the Meadows, it's a beautiful community that I go bike riding around a lot. They have sidewalks at a number of times they do get lifted and they just fix the sidewalk and keep the trees and that keeps up all the real estate values and it's much more valuable than a slab of concrete. There's also Broccoli Boulevard, which is off of 41. I'm sure you're familiar with that. You go through there and there's pines and oaks along the sidewalks, and I can see areas where they did have a rise in the sidewalk, and then eventually they would just fix it.
Well,
Fix
we have that here in Plantation where I live, and they actually they came through and they planed the leveling of the top
hmm
of the sidewalk to adapt to the height of the tree, so it wasn't a trip hazard anymore.
Right.
So it didn't, there's a couple ways of looking at it, and I liked how you said it. You just kind of adapt, but there are ways to adapt to these things that one, keep it still in play and keep the tree alive,
Right. Right.
and keep you cool and protected from sun. The flip side of that is you don't have to replace concrete right away. There's different things that you can do out there right now in the world
Yes.
that we've come up with, which we didn't have.
Yes.
20 years ago, we didn't have
Right.
these things.
Yes, and if you go into other communities, and of course you know I do this, I'll always look around at how
Yep.
they handle their trees and sidewalks, and you're right, they have that lattice brick that they use that they put in, and the advantage to that is when you start to get any lifts, all you have to do is take out those few lattice bricks where the problem is, and deal with it, and not have to take up the whole slab of concrete there and a lot of places use those. They look like grates. They're round, they're round around the tree, and then the rest of it looks like a grate. So again, if there's a problem, that entire grate can come up, and then they can deal with whatever they have to deal with, and then fix it that way.
Can,
But
can we
again, when you
can
think
we
about sidewalks are for people.
Yep.
So you want people to walk on them. It has to be shaded, and so if you remove the shade, it's not going to do anything. I mean, then no one's going to be walking there. So what's the point of even having the sidewalk? And I know that there were trees that were planted on Sumter that are close to the curb, but that was to shade the road. That was to shade the drivers when they're going down there. And did you know that again? And I look up all this information that roads that are shaded by trees can have up to a 25% longer asphalt life than when they don't, because asphalt, as you know, is petroleum based, and sun is what really kills the roads. So by having them shaded, that road is going to last a lot longer, which translates into dollars and cents. So there's, again, short term. What really is a short term problem should not be solved by something long term, a so-called long term solution, which is let's just take the tree down. No, let's just handle the problem and move on.
Yeah, I listen. I agree with that because we've got an issue coming here again, and I know it's coming because I know I have a trip hazard, but it's my association that has to take care of that, and we have oak trees, and I'll go back to the other side of it too, and it's the flooding, it's the watershed. Trees do a lot of consumption of water, and that's why they're here. That's why they're so prevalent in our community. And you're right. When we take things away, we've got to come up with different solutions that we didn't have before. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a fan I'm really not a fan of getting rid of all the trees. I'm more of I'm better about this today than I was when it was presented to me, because I will tell you it was presented probably I won't even talk about that. I'll just say there if you had to have answers to present, you have to have answers. That's why I'm talking to you about this now, is because I knew you would have the answers because you've
Mm-hmm.
been working on this project for so long. But the realization of cost is, when you sling in things, And my expectation is when you vote for something, you should have an answer for the other side.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't getting that until we talked today. So, the $2,000, I look at the $2,000. If you want to clear your lot, you're going to pay $2,000. All right. And that's
Right.
roundabout. It's not exact. We're just trying to give an example of what it
Right.
was. So
And
don't,
right. And you know what it gets rid of too, John, is the ordinance as it exists today, which went into effect in 2002, required this so-called 35% canopy on your own property, and that meant every single lot, every single parcel had to have a 35% canopy upon maturity. That meant that's why the clear cutting was done. We're going to plant these little trees, and when they're mature, they're going to give that 35% canopy. But that's what led to homeowners having to get a permit to take down a tree in their backyard, because if they planted that tree to satisfy that part of our code, then it had to be permitted for you to remove that tree, because now you weren't following the code anymore. This new ordinance gets rid of that. Like I said, if somebody is clear cuts their lot, they pay the mitigation, and they don't want to plant back any trees to get credit towards that mitigation. That is their choice, because if it's the one thing that I have learned in my tree quest is when people don't want a tree in their backyard, they don't want a tree. I mean, you cannot force people to have something they don't want on their property.
right,
And this gives them that opportunity. But they will pay a mitigation so that that tree can be planted someplace else then if you don't want it in your backyard. And I really noticed this when we did our street tree project on Salford Boulevard. We did that between 2008 and 2009. People for Trees partnered with the city, and we planted over 300 trees along North Salford. And I noticed that a lot of those houses on Salford didn't have any trees. Whatever the ordinance was saying you were supposed to have, they didn't have any trees. But we were planting one or two trees in front of that house. And I thought, well, that's fine. You know, if they don't want a tree in their backyard, but there's one in that right of way, then that's great. You're still providing for the canopy. So it doesn't really matter where you plant that tree necessarily, as long as it's somewhere. And that's what addressing a canopy is really supposed to mean, that you're not talking about every single individual homeowner and every single individual parcel, but you're looking at the whole of it where people are living.
right.
And this puts the onus, yes, on the city, that we have to do a better job at planting trees where we can, such as other right of ways and other places in the city that are barren, that have absolutely no trees. We'll throw some trees out there already, and then the city is responsible for taking care of them, and can provide for that canopy.
You're listening to WKDW Radio 97.5 and KDWRadio.com, broadcasting from the Bishop West Real Estate Mobile Tower. We're talking with Alice White, Commissioner Alice White, about our new tree ordinance and trees in general. But it's a lively topic, and we're growing as a town. And one of the questions before by John Cook, not this one, but the one prior, is that he also talked about the trees on the roadways. And I want to bring up, because I know it's a concern of yours. There's no doubt in my mind it's a concern of yours. There's a lot of trees on Sumter and Toledo Blade that post construction in the center median of both of those roads, they need some attention bad. Are those trees still alive in your book, or are they? Because I in my best estimation, it may be a dwindling tree on its way out. We need to get something else in there pretty quickly. And
Well, okay, there's two different roads. Sumter, they planted sweet gums in the center, which is my choice of tree, and that's really what we planted on Sumter. I mean, on Salford Boulevard. I'm not a big fan of planting oaks along sidewalks, or for the reasons that Mr. Cook brought up, that they are going to present some problems that you can take care of, but there's other tree choices. And
sweet gum is a beautiful tree. When it grows, it's a beautiful tree.
yeah, and it doesn't have the the kind of a root system that an oak necessarily sometimes gets. But again, not all trees are predestined to do that. So sweet gums though are deciduous, and so it's just coming back off. We had a hard freeze, and then also we haven't had rain. So people, it's a matter of educating people that we do have seasons in Florida. They're not as
You
you know obvious as up north, but we do have trees and plants that go dormant, and they're not dead. They haven't come back yet. So I know that the city has plans to replace those that have been determined to not be alive, but you have to wait and see what happens once we get the rains and the warmer temperatures start to be here on a regular basis. Are you seeing buds? Because then it's going to leaf out and it's going to be okay. Toledo Blade, somebody told me about Toledo Blade, and I went and looked, and I didn't notice anything that was. Again, there's bald cypress, which are deciduous, and they're not coming, they're not leafing out yet, so they look like they're dead, but they're just still dormant. They also planted loquat trees along in the median, and that was a city decision. Loquat is not native to Florida. They produce fruit, and that's why somebody was saying, why would they put a fruit tree in the median? I don't know. I don't know what the thinking was behind that. I wasn't asked for my opinion about that project at all. Um, and then also the loquat trees, they're not frost hardy. So some of them did suffer damage in that hard freeze that we had. But
Yeah.
they're mature enough that they should come back. But it's just going to take a longer period to get this back like a tree.
Let's educate then on what expectation people should look for as they're driving around season wise. If we're looking at trees and are we waiting for rainy season to come into play?
Yeah, that's really going to be the thing here is we have the warmer temperatures now, but the trees, they know what they're doing. They are live things, and trees that are deciduous, it's because they're reacting to three things basically: sunlight, temperature, and water. So trees go dormant when those three things are reduced, and they come back when those three things are there again. But all three things have to be there. So right now it's a matter of the water. If they're not being regularly irrigated, which I'm not a fan of irrigation either. I mean, you water trees in for their initial period, and then they should be okay on their own. That's what Florida Friendly is all about. Plus, irrigation costs us a lot of money to keep up here. I'm sorry to the irrigation company that has that contract, but that costs a lot of money to irrigate plants. And we always like all those trees we planted on Salford. There's no irrigation there. I hand watered those trees in for 6 weeks. Yeah, with a water tank and a pump. So and that's it. They never get any water other than what nature gives them. So.
Well, let's talk about the ordinance. Does this ordinance apply to the municipalities' land clearing and development projects? I'm sure it does.
Yes, it's for new development, right? And when people are going in to build something for the first time, that's when this is going to come into place.
And we're now talking about the same thing with the any land clearing that might be done similar to the West Villages. New land clearing, is that still the case, or does the commercial property get away with more?
They should fall. I have to find out about that, because the thing with something like West Villages, all of their development plan was done 20 something years ago, and that's what my understanding is, that all of that was approved. Whatever were the conditions approved 20 something years ago, they're still in place. And my understanding has always been that you can't go back and change that now. For example, somebody was asking me about the open space requirement, and Welland Park doesn't have a 10%, because when that was negotiated, they got that down, I think, to 5%. And that's how it is. So it doesn't matter if they're just clearing for the first time today, they don't have to have a 10% open space, because that's not what was agreed on when that land was rezoned to what it is today. So those large scale developments fall under a different thing, and that's separate and apart from when you have individual quarter acre lots and you have commercial parcels that have been commercial. They've been sitting there for decades, and now they're going to be developed. They're going to fall. Our new ordinance will apply to them.
So any old projects it doesn't apply to, but new projects. So let's say the same thing was happening in the West Villages today, and there wasn't a plan. They would fall under this new.
Right. And then the commercial properties that haven't been developed, they would also have to adhere to this, because it depends on when they pull their paperwork and when the permits are granted. But something like Welland Park, my understanding is a lot of those things were approved years ago. They just didn't take action on it until now. In fact, we're on our commission agenda for tomorrow. We have 2 plats that we're going to be looking at for approval or not. And again, that was land that was part of the original annexation. And so I'm still myself, when does it apply? When doesn't it? But my understanding is when those large scale developments were approved, most of the development orders were set in stone, and that's what it is.
Okay. So did Carrie says, did you ask about her pies?
What about the pies?
What about the pies, Carrie? So she just walked in the door from work, and she said, did you ask about the pies? Well, we've determined they're worth more than 5 cents. Because of the sign you have hanging behind you.
I'll take that sign down. Yeah.
Or you're going to have to do a price change.
I know. Yeah.
So, it's you do pies.
Yes.
And you have a very successful little side gig doing that. You might as well highlight that. You've got a couple minutes here, and then we'll go right back to trees again.
Okay. Yeah, it's fun because I get to meet a lot of people. I just did a little bake sale on Saturday over in El Jobin, and I did in fact, you were there, the music fest that was put on. Yes. Yep. And I set up a whole little booth there and sold pie slices and pies, and you just get to meet a lot of people. And when I do things like that, I also always think of myself as an ambassador for Northport, because when I was in El Jobin on Saturday, they always ask, where are you based? And I said, I'm in Northport. Oh, Northport. And you get to talk about, I get to talk about my city and where I am. And it's also interesting because most people don't know that I also wear a hat as a Northport City Commissioner, which is fine with me. I don't bring it up. Some people might say, gee, isn't there something else you do? So I just said, well, I'm the tree lady. Oh, but I thought I saw your name in the paper for something. So then I eventually get to, well, yes, I'm a city commissioner. Oh, yeah. So again, it gives me the opportunity to see other communities, to be in other communities, to get ideas, and also to, like I said, to really talk about what Northport has to offer.
Nice. And it's kind of a cool connection to people too.
Yes. And it's how you make those connections too. And so when something comes up and I say, wait a minute, I remember talking to somebody about this very thing, then I can contact them again, or just at least bring that up in the conversation that I'm having with my fellow commissioners or with you about something that went on.
Well, and I'm going to go right back to Chuck English's question here. He said, I should have said land clearing projects such as canals and waterways and banks. So if the city, we do a great job through Public Works keeping our waterways clear. If there's any projects like that where they have to take trees down, is this part of that mitigation?
No, that doesn't apply whenever utilities or any of that, when they have to come in and do anything. It's just not, it never does, never applies to that. Okay. Yeah.
Kind of hard to pay yourself back because you're the city.
Right.
So here's the question, and I know everybody's probably thinking it, and we haven't talked about it, but when you clear the lot and you have to pay let's just stick with your number that you gave as an example only, the $2,000. You're going to have to pay that money to where, and where does that money sit?
That goes into a tree fund, and the city has a tree fund, money that's been generated by, as of now, just from taking down heritage trees, which is, it's kind of a sad point to think about, that the only way that the tree fund gets money is, up until this point, is when a heritage tree of 30 inches in diameter or larger was removed. But that has been generating some enough income that the two arborist positions that we have, half their salaries are paid out of that tree fund account. But the big push is going to be to use that money to plant trees. There's about 5 different ways that money can be used. One of them is for buying land for preservation, is buying land that is not going to be touched. And that can also be a dual purpose. For example, public works, we have, and you probably know this, there are lots that are right where those water control structures are, that are privately owned. General development never thought about how are we going to get to those water structures if we're selling, if we build a house there.
Both sides.
They never figured that out. So up until now, the city was kind of just like borrowing, going through those lots, I guess, but they're now being more proactive. And in last couple of meetings, we have approved the purchase of some of those lots for those water control structures. And I said, I have no problem with using tree fund money for that, because as long as you don't take any trees down, because you're preserving a lot. It's just like, buying a lot in a neighborhood and just saying, we're just going to keep it. Well, this is what they're doing. They're just being very selective where those lots are, because the water control structures are there. So that's another way to use that tree fund money for tree preservation purposes.
And as always, the follow up to that on any fund you have set off to the side, is that untouchable money otherwise?
Yes, tree fund money. There's it's in the ordinance. There's I think just five ways it could be used. Education is one of them, but it's very specific. It's not a slush fund. It just can't be used to buy trucks or whatever. It has to be specifically for protection and preservation of our tree canopy.
So some of the things that we've learned today is that, like, basic, very basic information. And remember that as I'm saying this, you can use it as a baseline, but you can't use it as a fact, because your lot has to be looked at and determined how much you're going to have to owe or offset through mitigation. But we learned that it's roughly kind of a ballpark, $2,000 to remove trees, and you can get some of that credited back. If you leave a couple trees, you may wipe that out. You may significantly reduce it too. So there's some play there, give and take. And just so people understand that right now, to remove a turtle from your lot, it's $5,000 per turtle. Mm-hmm. And that's with a relocation program. So in the grand scheme of things, 2,000, and I will say it does become a factor when you are negotiating a piece of property, whether it's turtles or trees. It's going to be a factor, but the trees are not going to be as major as a deterrent as our friendly tortoises. I should say it correctly.
Tortoises. Right.
Yeah, because if I don't say it that way, somebody's going to get after me.
Right.
And the tortoises that are out there, they're pretty prevalent, because the more that we build, the more that they relocate and they scatter and they get on the other lots. And then you'll have, instead of the usual 1 or 2, you might run across that 6 to 8 because they have to go somewhere.
They have to go somewhere. And the reason why they are $5,000 to relocate is, my understanding, there's only one place in all of Florida that accepts relocated tortoises, and that's why. And that's a direct result of development.
That fee's almost doubled since COVID.
Right.
Which is crazy, but it's normal.
Yes, and the other thing I want to just point out about the 12 inches, the trees start mitigation to 12 inches is also going to be better for our arborists when they go out there, that they don't have to actually spend a lot of time traipsing around in a lot that was really pointless. I mean, our current ordinance, it says 3 inches, every single 3 inch or greater diameter tree had to be plotted on a survey, yet there was no mitigation until a tree was 30 inches. So it was really something that was being done that was taking a lot of time and effort on both the builder's part and also our arborists to go out there and count and locate all those 3 inch in diameter or larger trees. And there was nothing being we weren't getting anything for them anyway when they were being removed. So it was really that to me was the definition of bureaucracy, doing something that is totally pointless. At least now you can kind of eyeball if you have 12-inch diameter trees, and those are the ones that you're going to target to go in there and actually measure to see, okay, is this really a 12-inch diameter tree or is it only 8 inches? And then it doesn't qualify. But they don't have to go through every single square inch of that property for trees. They still are supposed to be out there looking for their gopher tortoises, of course.
So I'll follow that up with, have we hired more arborists? Because that could be a potential slowdown. How long, and I'll ask you this because you voted yes for it. So I got to figure you had a game plan. And most of us don't know the game plan, and we're learning that today. So is there a game plan in place to expedite the process so that people who are clearing their lot for their potential build have a quick turnaround versus, an additional 6 to 8 months delay?
Yeah, part of the game plan is that when we pass the ordinance, that there would be 45 days to have a plan in place to so the builders can understand what is happening and people. And in fact, tonight, and I'm going to that meeting tonight at 6 o'clock. There was one this morning, I understand, I think, and there's one tonight at 6 p.m. In City Hall chambers about the tree ordinance for people to understand how it's going to work and what's different about it. But like I just said, the way it's written now, it should be less time consuming for our arborists, just because they don't have to go onto a piece of property to see every single little 3-inch diameter tree. That if it looks pretty obvious there aren't any 12-inch diameter trees and the builder is saying there isn't, they can pretty much say, okay, I concur with that because I don't see any trees that could possibly be 12 inches in diameter. But if they think there's one, if they say that might be 11 inches, that might be 13 inches, that's the only one they have to go in there and actually measure. So it's going to cut down on what I call pointless time. I mean, spending a lot of time to do something that doesn't result in what you want it to end up resulting in. It doesn't make any sense. So at least now their efforts could be for those people who actually do want to save a tree, and they could be educating them. Okay, this is what you have to do to actually save a tree, which has to go beyond just not cutting it down. You have to put up barricades and keep construction away from that tree. And then people,
But that can kill a tree too.
Excuse me?
I said that can kill a tree too if you don't protect it while construction
it's
is
going
going.
to, and that's why I tell people, saving trees isn't just not cutting it down. That's not saving a tree on a construction site. You have to barricade it out to what's called the drip line, and just keep that zone free and clear of any activity. And then that person who wants to save that tree will get those conservation credits and then have that tree to enjoy after that house is built.
Yep. Well, listen, it was wonderful having you on the show. I am so glad that you were able to explain everything through. I think we hit some pretty hot topics that are out there right now in the community.
Yeah.
Please share this video. The more that it gets shared, the more people see it, the more people stop getting misinformation. I'm glad I learned a lot from you today, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, John.
Hey, thanks a lot. This is John Rawlings with Alice White. Commissioner Alice White and the tree lady, I should say, saying thanks and have a great day. Drive safe on the way home. Just be blessed. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right.